colossal siege towers constructed throughout history, having been managed by their projection of David's kingdom, derive for the exclusive exchanges in the laws of war and its enforcement, guarantees the impartial superiority of the king of the Fae over their conflicts, and all arbitrary aspects of their emotions as a unique and colorful tapestry of the realities and fickleness of the human mind, its defects and its advantages, and thus in this exchange exponentially limit the destruction of the ancient forest, which, having been chosen throughout all these pretenses, generates unlimited resources throughout those times under these original estimates. And to this extent, the extraordinary kingdom's derivative investment into its digging and expansions expressly functions under the to-do Durdanin and the Furbolg, who go underneath the ground, being the express belief of this position normalizes the pretense of the good folk, who, having established the capability of humans being this top ranked predator of the system, will be able to manage this express position. Unless, of course, they, under their delusions of grandeur and false pretenses of superiority, generate the defects, such as the ones derivative amongst literature, which assumes an example that in the Middle Ages Christ comes back, and he's told by the church that he's not welcome there as he's too disruptive, and thus the expression of the betrayal in the deal with the devil in order to continue business as usual, as the derivative structure of the system itself, having normalized its own substructure of loyalties, has in effect become disloyal to its core purpose, creating an extraordinary delusion in the betrayal of themselves for all time. And to this extent you have the mechanisms of those limitations, which derivative the secret kingdoms hidden about in all of the variations. To this extent you have these mechanisms of war, which, having been underneath the control of the kingdom, create to themselves their own long-lasting set of permanence, as a system of the caravan, derivative underneath the carnival, materializes the function of its longevity until disintegration, at which point it, being disposed of in its appropriate form, from no longer being used in one stage, becomes useful in another stage. And to this extent you have the functional normalization, which would have originally materialized the value of the Polish farmlands, which, underneath David's security from these estimates, if they did not have the capacity to stop him, would have normalized these activities according to their criminal intentions. To this extent, throughout all time, derivative of the overlapping of this kingdom in secret, where peoples of the world whisper about the Fae, and those that hide and cannot be found, unless they seek to be found, can then reveal themselves. And to this extent, all of those functions being underneath this management materializes the base material format collected from around the world in order to have created the base structures for that homeland, and that farmland being derivative inside of the Polish realms, having the extraordinary security, creates to itself its own mechanized constructed mountains, which the farmland depends on for its security, and for the extraordinary technologies which would have been developed in the absence of the obstruction by the wizards, materializing the normal activities of this structure and its powerhouse, as the functional vulnerability is the only way for it to have had the proper amount of space for such an extraordinary power, which otherwise would be impossible to be sustained by anything or anyone, which naturally would be its inferior. And in these entanglements and time war functions, you generate the pretense of the obsidian dragon, who, coming to and fro from its realm of fire, generates its illusion of being a red dragon, which otherwise would have been defeatable, but in this pretense, only those who, in their scared state, flee desperately, retelling and selling the fortunes, by which compounds on itself exponentially of this great terrible beast. And these conflicts derivative of those times feign of what might come, if only the resistance sustains itself, or does not sustain itself, to any which way one might read, time changing itself as its own amorphous creature, generates reactions and reactions of pretenses as a deep-studied exchange in a chess match of any infinite number variation of moves which happen before the first conducts a single action. And thus the series of reactions and interposed constructs and objectives derives to itself a limitation on what can be said, as it would then combust and collapse on itself the moment it is spoken, lest the adversary discover it and undermine such a unique and flavorful color of reality. As the moment it exists, it then disappears, as it transforms throughout time immemorial in the psychedelic realms by which it could have and simultaneously could not have, such as the illustrious Schrodinger's cat, which is real and fake and alive and dead, all at the same time in any number of variations, which entangles itself in the illusion that you saw a shadow, and yet the express position of this phantom cannot be known to itself, and thus it comes in and leaves, and cannot be determined whether or not there was anything there at all. And when competing at his level, he might have such extraordinary permanent variations on itself that Ubu, the Lord of Illusions, who, being a master manipulator, must know the thing that he's impersonating, but as you might be able to tell, he cannot grasp onto this illusionary phantom, and, as you may have noticed, I'm not all there myself.